February 24th, 2022, 10:12 a.m. The sky above Hostomel, a quiet suburb northwest of Kyiv, shimmered with silver dots. For a moment people thought it was snow. Then the air filled with the sound, a low rolling roar like thunder breaking over the horizon. They weren't clouds. They were parachutes. Hundreds of them. The 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade, elite Russian paratroopers from Ulyanovsk, veterans of Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, were dropping from the sky in the first hours of the invasion. Their mission: seize Antonov Airport at Hostomel, hold it, and open the gates for a massive airlift that would bring thousands of troops directly to the capital. On paper, it was perfect. Take the airfield, fly in reinforcements, crush Kyiv before nightfall. In Moscow, it was supposed to be the day one victory. In reality, it was a death sentence. Below them, Ukrainian National Guard troops from the 4th Rapid Reaction Brigade, just a few hundred men, were already waiting. They had been tipped off by intercepted radio chatter. And as the first Mi-8 transport helicopters roared into view, the Ukrainians opened fire. Stingers screamed through the air. 2 Russian choppers erupted in flame, spiraling into the Dnieper floodplain. Those who managed to jump landed under heavy fire, their parachutes glowing orange in the blaze of tracer rounds. Colonel Sergei Karasev, leading the paratrooper assault, shouted into his radio. Airfield secured within the hour. But the airfield wasn't secured. It was surrounded. The paratroopers, armed for speed not endurance, found themselves pinned down among hangars and runways as Ukrainian artillery began to fall, guided by drones, precise, relentless. By noon, the sky that was supposed to bring victory had turned into a killing ground. By early afternoon, the paratroopers had dug in around the Antonov airfield, clutching craters for cover. Smoke hung low across the tarmac. Burned helicopters and shattered troop carriers littered the runway like metallic carcasses. But even worse for them, the Ukrainian 72nd Mechanized Brigade was on the move, and the only way to reach the airfield was across the Irpin Bridge. That bridge would soon become legend. At 2 p.m., Ukrainian engineers received an order from Kyiv's command. Hold the bridge, at all costs. They knew what that meant. If the Russians crossed, Kyiv was finished. So they wired the structure with explosives, every beam, every support. Meanwhile, Russian armored columns were rushing south from Belarus to link up with the paratroopers at Hostomel. Convoys of BMD infantry vehicles and VDV troop trucks barreled down the highway, expecting to meet cheering civilians. Instead, they ran into a wall of fire. Ukrainian defenders, using American-supplied javelins and NLAWs, waited in ambush among the pine forests. In a single 15-minute engagement, 7 Russian armored vehicles were destroyed. When reinforcements tried to push across the Irpin Bridge, it detonated a column of fire and smoke shooting 100 feet into the air. The bridge was gone. So was the plan to resupply Hostomel. By nightfall, the paratroopers inside the airport realized they had been abandoned on the wrong side of history. Their radios crackled with confusion: no air cover, no reinforcements, no fuel. Russian high command had underestimated the resistance, and now their elite VDV troops were stranded behind enemy lines, surrounded by civilians turned partisans and soldiers who refused to retreat. The night sky above Hostomel flickered with explosions. And in Kyiv, as air raid sirens wailed, a single message was sent out by the Ukrainian General Staff. The paratroopers have been stopped. Kyiv stands. February 25, 2022 dawn. The wreckage of Antonov Airport glowed faintly in the early light. The hulking shadow of the world's largest cargo plane, the An-225 Mriya, lay broken across the tarmac, a victim of the same firestorm that had consumed Russia's airborne assault. Inside the airport perimeter, Russian VDV survivors huddled in small groups, low on ammunition and food. They had expected to be relieved within hours. Instead, they were being hunted. From the nearby town of Hostomel, Ukrainian territorial defense units, teachers, shopkeepers, off-duty police began to move in. Armed with rifles, Molotov cocktails, and captured weapons, they joined forces with the National Guard. For the first time in modern history, civilians and soldiers fought side by side in a European capital's suburbs. Overhead, Bayraktar TB, 2 drones circled silently. Each time Russian paratroopers tried to regroup, a missile streaked down from the sky. Precision, silence, detonation. At 10:15 a.m., a Russian BMD-4 tried to make a break for the main road. It made it 200 meters before being split apart by a javelin. Moments later, Ukrainian artillery, coordinated via Starlink communications, began to zero in. "They have drones everywhere," one surviving Russian officer later admitted. "It felt like the sky itself was against us." By noon, communications between the VDV at Hostomel and Russian command had collapsed. The only messages left were intercepted pleas. Requesting extraction, coordinates, please respond. There was no response. In Moscow, the news still called it a success. On the ground, Hostomel had become a graveyard, the elite 31st Guards Air Assault Brigade reduced to scattered squads, outgunned and outnumbered. The plan to take Kyiv in 48 hours was already dead. But no one in the Kremlin could admit it. As the second night fell over Hostomel, the crackle of small arms fire mixed with the deep thud of mortars. The airfield, once Russia's prized entry point into Ukraine, was now a cratered wasteland. Fires raged in the hangars. Shells continued to land with unnerving precision. The Ukrainian 72nd Brigade had surrounded the base from 3 directions, cutting off every escape route. They weren't attacking recklessly, they were patient, methodical. Each position of Russian resistance was first marked by drone, then erased by artillery or precision-guided fire. The paratroopers, proud, disciplined, and trained for lightning assaults, had been reduced to fragments. They were fighting from rubble, scavenging water from burst pipes, tearing rations from dead comrades' packs. And still, they refused to surrender. At 3 a.m., a Ukrainian recon team radioed a single line back to Kyiv. "The VDV are gone." When dawn broke, the scene was biblical. Rows of burned BMDs lay twisted and blackened. Bodies of paratroopers in blue-striped undershirts and berets were scattered across the field, frozen mid-movement. A few survivors tried to flee north through the forest, only to be ambushed by territorial defense volunteers. By mid-morning, Antonov Airport was back under Ukrainian control. Footage taken by drones showed smoke rising over the airfield, black plumes stretching into the horizon. The first clear sign that Russia's lightning victory had failed before it began. The loss of the Hostomel airhead meant the end of the airborne phase of Russia's plan. There would be no rapid air bridge, no encirclement of Kyiv. Instead, there would be a long, grinding war of attrition. What had been envisioned as the triumph of Russia's elite paratroopers had turned into their annihilation. A single battle that shattered the illusion of invincibility. February 26, 2022. The bridge at Irpin was now just a jagged skeleton of concrete and rebar jutting from the frozen river. It was supposed to be the lifeline for Russia's armored columns pushing toward Kyiv. Instead, it became their tomb. When the paratroopers at Hostomel fell silent, Russian reinforcements from the 36th Combined Arms Army tried to storm the area from the north. They brought tanks, artillery, and new waves of airborne troops, but the terrain had already turned against them. The fields had thawed into mud, the roads were littered with the burned hulks of their own vehicles, and the destroyed bridge forced every column into narrow choke points. From the high ground west of Irpin, Ukrainian forces had perfect fields of fire. Artillery teams with laser-guided shells and forward observers from drone units coordinated strikes that hit with surgical precision. Every vehicle that tried to cross was vaporized before reaching the other side. "We watched the entire assault collapse in minutes," one Ukrainian officer later said. "They kept sending men into a place that no longer existed." Russian commanders ordered airstrikes, but their own troops were too close to the target. Mi-24 gunships swept low over the smoke, firing blindly into the tree line, and were met with Stinger missiles that turned the sky into a theater of falling flame. By nightfall, what remained of the elite VDV detachments was scattered among the ruins of Hostomel, Irpin, and Bucha. Their dead left on the roads, their surviving officers captured or wounded. It was no longer a battle for a bridge. It was the symbolic collapse of the 3-day war. The fall of the bridge at Irpin marked more than a tactical failure. It was the first crack in the myth of Russian dominance. The same force that had stormed Grozny, marched through Georgia, and bombed Aleppo, had now been stopped by a few hundred defenders, engineers, and volunteers who refused to yield. And as smoke drifted across the frozen Dnieper, Kyiv still stood not as a prize, but as a warning. An empire had tried to cross a bridge into history. It never made it to the other side.